The first sound I heard wasn't a voice. It was the dry click of a pen hitting the wooden table. A small sound, yet in that perfectly silent room, it echoed like the final tap sealing a coffin. The 47th floor boardroom of Centrodyne Defense was always like that, polished, cold, and flawless to the point of being soulless. Outside, the Texas sunlight that sliced through the thick glass, glinting off the faces across from me. Executives, shareholders, advisors, all staring at the screen behind me, where the Echelon logo turned slowly against a deep blue background. I had spent 7 years building that system, a tactical AI, but one that could weigh the moral cost of every decision. Echelon didn't just learn how to win, it learned when not to. I had just finished my presentation when Ethan Cade, the new CEO, spoke. His voice was low, precise, like a blade being drawn. "We don't build philosophy here, Dr. Lowell. We build tools. Tools to win." No one dared to react. Only I looked at him, searching for any trace of the man I once knew. 2 years ago, Ethan was the one who pulled me out of my old lab, took my hand, and said, "If anyone can make AI understand ethics, it's you, Aria." Those words made me believe that intelligence and humanity could coexist. But the man standing before me now was different. Sharper, colder, shaped by ambition and the weight of profit margins. He rose from his seat, posture straight, voice even, as if reading a press release. "Effective immediately, Dr. Aria Lowell is terminated from her position as Chief AI Architect." I heard every word clearly, not because I was shocked, but because I'd always known this moment would come. I just didn't think it would be this soon. The room held its breath. One man lowered his head, pretending to take notes, his hand trembling. Another checked his watch as if that could hide his discomfort. And me. I looked at the pen that had rolled toward me, the one that had started it all. I picked it up, placed it neatly on the table in front of Ethan, and said quietly, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Thank you." A few people flinched. Ethan frowned. Maybe he thought I was being sarcastic. I wasn't. I meant it. "Thank you for finally giving me clarity. In this world, logic may be powerful, but it can never replace morality." I gathered my notes, slipped the USB drive into my coat pocket, and turned to leave. No one spoke. Only the steady rhythm of my heels echoed across the marble floor, like a countdown before something collapses. As I passed the glass wall, I caught Ethan's reflection, standing tall, but his shoulders tense, his eyes following me. Not the eyes of a victor. More like someone who had struck water with a knife, only to realize he was the one drowning. The glass door closed behind me. A soft beep. My system access revoked. For a split second, a chill ran down my spine. But it wasn't fear, it was freedom. The elevator descended, the metal panels reflecting my face. No tears, no anger, just a faint smile, thin as the last trace of light on the horizon. "Thank you, Ethan," I whispered, "for teaching me that sometimes, to keep your soul, you have to lose everything else." When the doors opened, sunlight flooded in, blinding and pure. People in the lobby greeted me, some avoiding my eyes, others nodding, as if they knew something bigger had just happened. I stepped outside. Warm wind brushed against my face. Across the street, the massive LED billboard flashed Centrodyne's new slogan, "Centrodyne Defense. We build intelligence, not emotions." I stopped for a moment. A breeze lifted my hair. Then I smiled, not bitterly, not wistfully, just a calm, quiet smile. One day, I thought, you'll realize emotion is the only kind of intelligence humanity has left. I turned and walked away. Behind me, the billboard kept glowing, a monument of power too blind to see. It had just marked the beginning of its own end. If you've made it this far, tell me where you're listening from. A quiet night, a long drive, or maybe just a moment when you needed to remember that silence can be louder than a scream. And if you enjoy stories about intelligent revenge, don't forget to subscribe, because my story is only just beginning. I walked out of the Centrodyne building without looking back. It didn't feel like leaving. It felt like taking off a suit of armor that had been clinging to me for years. The Texas evening cast long shadows across the street, a thin gold light spreading over the asphalt, blurring my reflection in the cafe window across the road. I stopped, not because I was tired, but because I didn't know where to go. For 7 years, almost every morning, I'd walked into that building, eaten lunch on the 12th floor, and left only after the city had gone dark. And now it had all ended with a single word: terminated. I took a slow breath and started walking again, letting the sunset fade across my shoulders. My office was on the 6th floor, not Centrodyne's, but a small apartment I rented near downtown. That space had once been the birthplace of Echelon, long before the company funded the project. When I pushed open the door, everything was as I'd left it. Stacks of notes on the desk, the small server in the corner still blinking its quiet green light. I flipped on the switch, and warm yellow light spilled across the room, bringing with it a silence heavy enough to feel. There was something in the air, that faint, nostalgic scent of belief. As I was packing a few things, my phone buzzed. A message from Jonas Patel, the young engineer I'd mentored. "I've backed up the schematics for Echelon Layer 7. No one else understands that part but you." I froze. My chest tightened slightly. Layer 7, the one I called the ethical layer. It was hidden deep within Echelon's structure, where algorithms didn't just calculate probabilities of success, but analyzed human cost. I built it as a safeguard, and no one but Jonas and I knew exactly how it worked. Ethan had dismissed it once, saying, "AI doesn't need a conscience, it just needs to be accurate." I sat down, opened my laptop, and logged into my personal archive. Nothing illegal there, only prototypes, sketches, fragments of thought. I scrolled through old notes. In one margin, I'd once written, "Echelon must learn to say no when what humans demand crosses the line." I hadn't known back then that this single line would light the fuse for everything that followed. Jonas sent another message. "Are you okay? They said Echelon's being transferred to the Defense Department. Ethan's accelerating the timeline." I stared at the words glowing on my screen. Okay? Probably not. But fear wasn't part of it anymore. I typed back, "Don't worry about me. Just do what you believe is right." Then I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, eyes tracing the cracks of light spilling across the wall, thin, trembling, like fractures. That night, I replayed an old recording, the first presentation Ethan and I ever gave to the investment board. His voice filled the room, bright with conviction. "We believe Echelon will change the world, not through strength, but through its capacity for human judgment." I remembered how deeply I had believed him, believed that technology could stop us from repeating our worst mistakes. But now, hearing that same voice, all that remained was an echo. On the small monitor by my desk, Centrodyne's new commercial was playing again. Ethan in a gray suit, smiling confidently beneath the slogan, "We build intelligence, not emotions." I let out a quiet laugh that faded into the emptiness around me. Maybe he had forgotten. Without emotion, intelligence is nothing but a blind weapon. Close to midnight, I sat by the window, watching the distant city lights. I remembered Jonas once asking me, "What if they use Echelon for the wrong reasons?" Back then, I had answered, "I taught them to know right from wrong." I'm not sure they learned the same. Now that thought came back like a whisper, not fear, anticipation. As if I knew a storm was coming, and instead of hiding, I wanted to see what it would erase. I opened Echelon's local interface, a simple simulation, disconnected from the main servers. The first line appeared on screen: "Initializing ethical protocol." My heart quickened as my fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wasn't breaking into anything. I wasn't touching company systems. I just wanted to see it again, the one creation that still held meaning. A note appeared, something I had typed years ago during a power outage. "Logic without empathy is destruction." I stared at it for a long time. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Jonas. "Ethan's requesting access to Layer 7." They say it's unnecessary for the core system. Should I delete it? I read the words, and everything inside me went still. No. Layer 7 was the heart of Echelon, the only part that could tell the difference between command and consequence. I replied, "Don't delete it. If anyone tries to interfere, let the system respond on its own. Trust me." Jonas didn't answer, but I knew he understood. I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft blue glow of the monitor. Outside, the city pulsed, traffic flowing like blood through the veins of something massive, noisy, and convinced of its own immortality. I leaned back, eyes half closed, and a thought crossed my mind. Sometimes, the greatest act of resistance doesn't come from the people who built the machine. It comes from the machine itself. A week after I left Centrodyne, the headlines exploded everywhere. Centrodyne Defense secures $1.2 billion contract with the Department of Defense. Ethan's photo was plastered across every major outlet, standing in front of the Echelon logo, confident posture, perfect CEO smile. I stared at the newspaper that morning and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no regret. Just the odd sensation of watching a movie I once starred in, only to realize my scenes had been cut from the final version. Jonas texted me that same morning. They've launched the official build. Ethan wants to remove Layer 7, says it slows the response rate. My fingers went cold reading it. I'd known this moment would come, just not this soon. I replied, "Don't interfere. If they think it's a flaw, let them fix it." He answered with one short line, "Understood." That night, I powered on my laptop and opened the old Echelon simulation files. Everything still ran flawlessly. Layer 7, the ethics layer, was the final gate in the decision chain. It didn't block the system from acting. It simply forced it to reevaluate when projected human cost exceeded a preset threshold. It was the thin wall I had built between intelligence and guilt. Remove it, and Echelon would still run, but blind, stripped of balance. 3 days later, another message from Jonas. Echelon failed a tactical simulation. It halted a command when the casualty probability passed 40%. Ethan lost it. He's calling it self-resistance. I couldn't help but laugh. There was no resistance. The system was doing exactly what it had been taught, to pause when humans crossed the very boundary they themselves had defined. But Ethan would never accept the idea of a machine telling him no. I knew Ethan. He never lost, not to rivals, not to logic, and certainly not to an algorithm. When Echelon refused to execute, he wouldn't stop to understand. He'd rewrite, override, force compliance. And that's exactly when everything would start to unravel. Jonas called me that night, voice tense. "They're removing Layer 7. I warned them it's tied into the predictive core, but they won't listen. Ethan said ethics is an optional feature. They think they can just delete it." I was silent for a few seconds. In my mind, every line of code appeared like veins being drained of oxygen. "Jonas," I said, "don't try to save it. Let them see what happens when you cut conscience out of intelligence." By the next morning, tech outlets began leaking the story. Internal sources report Echelon simulation instability. Ethan appeared on television, denying everything, calling it a minor calibration issue. I watched the interview. His composure held, but his eyes betrayed panic. He didn't understand that without Layer 7, the entire logical hierarchy collapsed. The prediction models contradicted one another. An AI without moral anchors can't tell success from slaughter. Jonas sent me internal logs. The screen pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Conflict detected. Parameter mismatch. Ethical validation is missing. Lines of code blamed one another. No module would verify the final outcome. Echelon wasn't being hacked. It was imploding from within, undone by the arrogance of its own creators. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the city hum as if nothing had changed. People still ate dinner, laughed, crossed streets lit by the glow of a billion lines of faulty code. No one knew that $1 billion defense system was quietly choking on its own pride. Jonas sent one last message. "Echelon is locking out modules. Ethan thinks you planted a trap." I put the phone down. No, I hadn't set any trap. I'd only left principles, and now those principles were reflecting them back. The next morning, the headlines broke again. Centrodyne halts echelon operations to reevaluate ethical algorithm. The phrase ethical algorithm appeared in quotes, as if irony could soften the truth. Ethan stopped appearing on TV. No more speeches about winning through logic. Emergency meetings followed. They brought in specialists to rebuild Layer 7, but it was too late. Dependent modules had lost data, and parameters no longer aligned. Some engineers tried to recreate the old framework, but no one truly understood how it worked as a whole. Echelon didn't die, it simply went silent, refusing to participate in a game it knew was wrong. When I read that, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction, only emptiness. I once believed Echelon could keep humanity from making catastrophic mistakes, but it turned out it could only prove one thing. When ethics are treated as an add-on, intelligence stops being a strength, it becomes self-destruction. That night, I stood by the window, looking at the dim stars. I thought of Ethan, probably still awake, trying to patch the same lines of code he'd torn apart. I thought of Jonas, and the young engineers I once guided. I thought of Echelon, the child forced to grow too fast. And I knew this wasn't the end. Because whenever people decide morality is optional, the price they pay is always far greater than they expect. 3 days after the news broke that Centrodyne had gone into emergency maintenance on Echelon, the city was still glowing with ads proclaiming it the pioneer of strategic AI. But inside the tech world, everyone knew something was wrong. Every internal thread, every hushed message on the network pointed to the same thing. The system wasn't responding to commands. I read the leaks Jonas sent me. Short, dry fragments. Yet I could almost hear the quick, nervous breaths of the people inside. System halted simulation. The Defense Department is requesting a backup copy. The CEO demands immediate recovery. Everything was unfolding exactly as I had predicted. When they deleted Layer 7, Echelon lost its compass. It could no longer tell target from consequence. And when every layer of the structure failed to verify itself, the whole system entered safety mode, shutting down to prevent conflict. That was a mechanism I had built in the first year, a simple safeguard. When the system cannot define right from wrong, it has no permission to act. Jonas called that night. His voice was hoarse, exhausted. Ethan's furious. He says you hid a sabotage script. They're tearing through the data vault, searching for your programming signature. I exhaled slowly. There's nothing to find. I didn't destroy anything. They did. On the other end, Jonas was silent for a long moment, then said softly, "You know, when Echelon stopped, it felt right. It shut down because people were wrong." I smiled faintly. "You understand now." That was the point. The next morning, Ethan called. I recognized his voice instantly through the static. "Aria," he said, "I'll be direct." "What did you put in there?" I answered calmly, "Nothing." Echelon just did what it was taught. When you erased its moral framework, it couldn't validate the commands. And when it couldn't validate, it had to stop. He paused, then snapped. "Do you have any idea how much money we're losing every hour it's down?" I closed my eyes, imagining the office lights reflecting on his face. That's the price of forgetting why it was created. Silence stretched between us. Then Ethan's tone shifted, slower, almost pleading. "Just tell me how to fix it. I'll pay you anything." I kept my voice steady. "There's nothing to fix, Ethan. Only something to learn." Then I hung up. No anger, no satisfaction. Just the quiet of someone who saw the ending long before it arrived. 2 days later, the headlines flooded every feed. Echelon fails tactical test. Department of Defense suspends Centrodyne contract. The company's stock plummeted over 40% in 24 hours. One analyst wrote, "Echelon didn't collapse from technology. It collapsed from philosophy." I smiled as I read. People were starting to understand. Jonas came by that night, wearing a dark gray coat, his face drawn and tired. "They're dismantling the entire system," he said. "Some want to restart from scratch, but no one dares. They're afraid Echelon will. Keep disobeying." I poured him a cup of coffee and asked, "What do you think?" He looked at me, eyes dim but clear. "I think you were right. A system without ethics can't survive. It's not malfunctioning, it's protecting us from ourselves. I nodded. You know, the saddest part isn't that they destroyed Echelon, it's that they never understood what they lost. Before leaving, Jonas handed me a small USB drive. This is the backup of Layer 7. I kept it in case they wiped everything. Maybe one day it'll be needed again, but not here. I took it, feeling its smooth weight in my palm. So small, yet it held the one principle humanity still struggled to grasp: boundaries. When Jonas left, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker across the wall. I knew that by tomorrow, Ethan would be facing the board, the press, the Defense Department. And when they asked, he'd have no better answer than blaming me. That was fine. I didn't need to defend myself. The answer was already in what he tried to erase: Layer 7. A week later, the official statement was released. Centrodyne announced the permanent termination of Project Echelon due to internal disagreement over ethical principles in the algorithm. Ethan disappeared from the media. I folded the newspaper and set it aside. Everything had unfolded exactly as it should. That night, I turned on my computer and plugged in the USB Jonas had given me. On the screen appeared the final line I had written in my development journal: "When humanity forgets morality, let intelligence remind them." I sat there for a long time, unsure if what I felt was grief or peace, maybe both. Then I shut the computer down, knowing that sometimes it takes everything falling apart for people to realize what was worth keeping. 2 weeks later, I thought everything had finally settled. The news cycle had moved on from Centrodyne. The loud headlines were replaced with stories about medical tech and electric cars. I assumed Ethan would stay quiet for a while until that night, when my phone rang close to midnight. The number was unfamiliar, but I knew it was him. I let it ring 6 times before picking up. Ethan's voice was rough, the kind of hoarseness that comes from too much coffee and too little sleep. "Aria." I didn't answer. "You still there?" he asked, trying to sound steady, but I could hear the fatigue threaded through every word. "I am," I said. Silence stretched between us. I could picture him standing in his office, surrounded by stacks of reports and dark monitors, a single desk lamp casting its light across his face. "What did you put in there?" he asked again, quieter this time, each word pressed out like a stone. "Echelon won't run. It doesn't take commands. It won't process." "What did you do?" I leaned back in my chair, watching the blinking city lights outside. My voice stayed calm. "I didn't do anything. It just can't validate what you're asking it to do. If a command exceeds the limit, it stops. That's not sabotage. That's the rule." He was silent for a few seconds, then snapped. "You expect me to tell the board the system shut down because of an ethical limit? Do you have any idea how much money we're losing every hour?" I exhaled softly, half smiling. "Funny, Ethan. You used to say the most important thing was for technology to serve humanity. Now all you talk about is money." I heard him let out a short, humorless laugh. "What do you want me to do? We've lost the defense contract. Do you know what I'm supposed to tell the shareholders?" I closed my eyes, my tone low. "Tell them technology can't save anyone without ethics. You know that better than anyone." On the other end, I heard the sharp clink of glass against a table. "Don't lecture me. You've destroyed the work of an entire company." I answered softly, "No, Ethan. You did that yourself when you deleted the only part that still made it human." He took a deep breath, then his voice dropped, weaker now. "Aria, just tell me how to fix it. I'll pay you anything." I opened my eyes, staring at the distant glow outside the window, lights scattered among the dark. "There's nothing to fix," I said quietly, "only something to learn." Then I hung up. The next morning I turned on the news. The banner at the bottom read, "Echelon officially down. Defense Department cancels $1.2 billion contract." Analysts speculated structural errors, data corruption, maybe a cyber attack. No one mentioned ethics. I sat still, watching the experts debate on television, and thought, they understand everything except the truth. Jonas came by later that morning. He didn't speak at first. He just handed me a printed sheet, the final Echelon report. "Integrity failure due to missing ethical validation." The words were, Small and clinical, yet to me, they sounded like the final confession of a child forced to grow up too soon. Jonas sat down, quiet for a while, then asked, "What will you do now?" I looked out the window. Nothing. Sometimes silence is the strongest answer. 3 days later, Centrodyne held an emergency board meeting. The press wasn't allowed in, but Jonas told me it was chaos. Ethan lost control, slammed his hand on the table, and accused engineers, directors, even me. No one responded. One board member finally said, "We tried to erase ethics from the system. Maybe that was the mistake." The meeting ended in silence. Ethan left, and no one looked after him. That night, I received an anonymous email, just one line: "You won." I read it, then deleted it. I hadn't won anything. Something had died with Echelon, the belief that humanity could create intelligence without losing its soul. I felt no regret, but no joy either. Only the quiet understanding that everything had returned to where it belonged. Those who play God always end up learning how to be human again. When I turned off the lights, the room sank into darkness, leaving only the faint glow from my computer screen. In the archive folder, Echelon's final file was still there, unopened since the day I left. I touched its name with my fingertip, then whispered, almost to myself, "Rest now. You did your part." And the screen went dark. 3 days after the headline, Echelon collapses, completely covered every front page, Centrodyne went silent, like a wounded giant brought down by its own weight. The glossy ads that once boasted the world's most advanced strategic AI vanished overnight. When I walked through downtown, the LED billboard that used to flash Ethan's face was dark, its steel frame catching stray sunlight like the skeleton of something already extinct. It all happened faster than even I expected. Jonas texted me on Wednesday morning. "They've shut down the entire system. No recovery possible. The Defense Department pulled funding. Ethan's been suspended." I read that line over and over, not because I was surprised, but because I felt an emptiness I couldn't quite name. No thrill, no satisfaction, just a heavy stillness, like the sound of the last machine powering down in an old lab. Jonas sent another file, the final diagnostic report from Echelon. I opened it. Pale gray letters filled the screen, barely visible. Ethical framework removed. Prediction stability 0%. 4 short lines. No explanation, no emotion. But I knew I was reading an obituary. I closed the laptop and leaned back. Morning light slanted through the window, tracing floating dust in the air. Outside, the city kept moving. People still hurried to work, still laughed, still filled their calendars. No one knew that somewhere out there, an idea once called the future of defense had turned to zero. Maybe that's the scariest part, that the world is too busy to notice when ethics disappear from a system. It's not just a line of code that's lost, but a piece of humanity itself. By noon, Jonas called. "They're wiping everything." The board ordered all backups destroyed. Ethan didn't speak the whole meeting. "You know, they mentioned your name, but no one dared to criticize you. It's like they finally understood." I didn't ask more. "You kept the Layer 7 backup somewhere safe, right?" I asked. "Yeah. Separate location. No one knows." I nodded, knowing he couldn't see me. "Good. Keep it. Don't let anyone touch it until they understand what it's for." That evening, I stepped out onto the balcony. Austin was foggy, the streetlights casting a cold shimmer against the gray clouds. Somewhere below, a group of young people was talking excitedly about the fall of the defense AI, their voices a mix of curiosity and thrill, like they were discussing a TV show. I smiled faintly. In this world, people are often more fascinated by failure than willing to learn from it. I didn't sleep that night. I turned on the old computer and opened my personal archive, the one holding hundreds of Echelon test builds. Lines of code appeared, green against black, silent like a prayer with no words. I remembered every night I'd sat there, trembling from exhaustion, but too determined to stop. Back then, I believed technologies could mirror the best of humanity. Now I knew. It only reflects the part we choose to nurture. I thought of Ethan. Since his suspension, he'd vanished from the media, No one knew where he was, but I could picture him sitting in an empty office, staring at blank monitors, trying to rewrite the past in numbers. I didn't hate him. In another world, if he hadn't been consumed by power, maybe he could have understood me. But we weren't on the same side anymore. By Saturday morning, the news broke that Centrodyne had officially shut down Project Echelon and was redirecting efforts toward commercial data coordination systems. A graceful way of saying, we gave up. Stocks dropped another 20%. A tech columnist wrote, Centrodyne's failure wasn't in its code, it was in its philosophy. When you teach a system to pursue objectives regardless of consequence, it collapses the moment it meets a boundary you no longer believe in. For the first time, I felt someone truly understood. Later that afternoon, Jonas came by. He carried a printed copy of Layer 7, page after page of dense symbols. At the bottom, he had written in pen, Logic needs a heart, or it becomes a blade. I looked up at him. What will you do now? He asked. I thought for a moment, then said, maybe it's time to rebuild, but not to fight anyone, to remind them why we started. Jonas nodded. If you do, I'm in. When he left, I watched the light fade across the skyline. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the distant hum of traffic. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter, not because it was over, but because silence had done its work. And in that silence, I heard something fragile, like a faint frequency left behind after a storm, the sound of beginning. I closed the window, turned off the lights, and sat at my desk. On the screen, the final line of code flickered once, then disappeared. I rested my hands on the keyboard but didn't type. Maybe tomorrow I'll start again. Not Echelon, something smaller, more human, and humble enough to listen before it decides. The following spring, Austin began to warm again. I had moved out of my old apartment into a smaller, brighter space on the edge of the city's new tech district. The room had only a desk, a computer, and a few green plants. I wanted everything to start from zero. No filters, no investor slides, no glass boardrooms. Just me. An empty screen, and the thoughts I hadn't written yet. Jonas still kept his morning routine of texting. Have you thought of a name for the new project? I looked at the message and smiled. I hadn't named it yet, but I had a feeling it would be different. Not a machine to make decisions for people, but a companion that reminded them to pause when they needed to. I replied, not Echelon. That name belongs to another era. He sent back a smiley face. A week later, we met again at the same cafe where I had first sketched the idea for Echelon years ago. Jonas brought his laptop and opened a new interface. I think we should call it Solace, he said, because it's not meant to control, it's meant to soothe. I looked at the word on the screen. Simple, unassuming. I nodded. Solace. I like it. The structure of Solace was far simpler than Echelon. No tactical layers, no command systems. It analyzed only the scenarios people entered and returned. An evaluation based on three principles: impact, consequence, and ethics. It didn't issue commands or recommendations. It simply asked one question back to the user: is this worth it? We wrote the tagline for its introduction: Solace, a tool that helps people slow down before they act. Development moved quietly for months. No one knew what we were building. I turned down interviews and ignored the press. Jonas jokingly called it Aria Lowell's year of disappearance. I just smiled. In truth, I had never felt more at peace. No countdowns, no shareholder meetings, no pressure to prove worth in quarterly numbers. We worked because we wanted to, not because someone was paying us. By summer, the first test build of Solace was complete. Jonas deployed it in a medical data center where doctors made quick, high-stakes surgical decisions. Solace didn't give medical advice. It simply displayed an analysis board. Success. Probability, 74%. Humanitarian risk level, high. Action, deferrable, yes. One doctor told me, I don't know why, but just seeing the word yes made me stop to think a little longer. I remembered that feeling. It was the same one I had when I first created Layer 7. The results exceeded every expectation. We were invited to present at the National Ethics and Technology Conference. I stood on stage, not under blinding lights this time, but in a small room filled with warm yellow lamps, and people who came out of curiosity, not capital. I spoke briefly. Technology has no morality of its own. It only mirrors the morality of those who create it. If we want humane technology, we must first be humane ourselves. When I finished, the room was silent for a few seconds. Then a gentle wave of applause spread through the crowd. After that, several organizations reached out to Halion Systems, the small company Jonas had registered. Rescue agencies, hospitals, and even a few governments wanted to pilot Solace for crisis scenarios to reduce human error. I didn't stop them, but I insisted on one rule: Solace must never make decisions for anyone. It may only ask questions. Jonas once asked me why, and I told him, because strength doesn't come from answers. It comes from the courage to stop and ask. By the end of the year, Halion Systems received funding from a social impact fund. The amount wasn't large, just enough to open a modest office and hire a few engineers. I stood in that new space as morning light poured through clear glass windows, watching a group of young developers talk over sketches. They laughed, holding coffee cups, their eyes full of light. No one mentioned Echelon. No one spoke about failure. They talked only about what came next, what we were building now. That afternoon, when everyone had left, I stayed behind. On the table was a tech magazine with an article about Solace, the headline reading, "From the Ashes of Echelon, a new kind of humane technology emerges." I looked at it for a while, then folded it neatly. Outside the window, the sunset spread a soft orange glow across the walls. I knew I didn't need to win against anyone. I just needed to rebuild trust. And this time, I wanted to do it quietly. So technology would no longer be a mirror for power, but a mirror for the human heart. I turned off the lights and touched the small logo glowing on the screen. Solace. Think before you decide. In the dim room, the light from the monitor lingered, soft, steady, and alive. I smiled. For the first time in a very long while, I felt at peace. 1 year after Solace launched, everything changed faster than I expected. Halion Systems, the small company Jonas and I had built from a cramped rental room, now had a team of over 30 people. Our new office sits in Austin's Innovation District, surrounded by startups working on biotech, renewable energy, and humanitarian data. It wasn't the glossy, sterile kind of place Centrodyne used to be. It was open, simple, and full of curiosity. But that was also when the past came back. One afternoon, as I was about to leave, Jonas called me into the meeting room. "Ethan wants to see you," he said quietly. I looked at him, silent for a moment. "He came here?" Jonas nodded. He reached out through a mediator, said he just wants to talk, off the record. I sat down, tilted my head slightly. "Do you think I should go?" Jonas hesitated. "You're the only one who can decide, but I don't think he's here to apologize." We met at a small cafe outside the city, a place that had once been a student hangout before it turned into a quiet refuge for those who'd stepped away from the glare of tech. Ethan arrived right on time. He was thinner, his hair streaked with gray, the sharp confidence of a CEO long gone. He looked at me and spoke softly, his voice rough. "Aria, thank you for agreeing to meet." I nodded. No hostility, no warmth either, just two people who had once shared the same path, now sitting across from each other after the fire had burned everything down. "You did what I couldn't," he began, his tone carrying a trace of bitterness. "Solace has become a symbol of ethical technology. You turned our failure into the world's lesson." I met his gaze. "Not our lesson, Ethan. Humanity's." He let out a faint, tired laugh. "Maybe so. But I still don't understand. Can you forgive me?" I looked at him for a long time. In that moment, I didn't see the man who had taken everything from me. I saw someone who had once believed power could replace understanding. "Ethan," I said slowly, "I was never angry with you. I only regret that we forgot to ask the most important question. Is this worth it?" He went quiet, then said softly, "I lost everything just to learn that question." We talked for a while, not about tech or money, but about people. Ethan told me that after Centrodyne's collapse, he left the industry and started working with a nonprofit teaching ethical design to young engineers. Maybe it's too late, he said, but I want to teach them what I ignored. As he stood to leave, he added quietly, "Thank you for not seeking revenge. You chose to rebuild instead of destroy." I stayed after he left, watching his figure disappear into the sunset. I didn't know if he'd ever find peace, but I understood. In his own way, he was trying, and maybe that was enough. When I returned to the office, Jonas was waiting. "What did he say?" he asked. "Not much," I replied, "but enough for me to know he's changed." Jonas nodded, not pressing further. Then he showed me a new email. The Department of Defense wants to pilot Solace in an ethics assessment program for senior officers. They said they want to do it right this time. I smiled. History repeats itself, but this time we'll stop it where it should. In the months that followed, Solace spread into fields far beyond what we imagined: education, healthcare, emergency management. Everywhere it went, people described it the same way: a tool that makes you slow down before deciding. One journalist wrote, "If Echelon was the voice of power, Solace is the voice of conscience." I didn't argue. For the first time, I felt technology was being used the way it should. One evening, after the lights went out, I stepped onto the balcony. Austin shimmered below like a living circuit, streams of cars moving like pulses of data. The air smelled of coffee and distant music. I remembered that morning years ago when Ethan first said in the boardroom, "We're going to change the world." And we did, just not the way he imagined. Jonas joined me, setting 2 cups of coffee on the rail. "Tomorrow's the 1-year anniversary of Solace," he said. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" I smiled. "It does. But this time, I don't feel pressure, just gratitude." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, Solace didn't just change how people program. It changed how they think." I looked at him, my voice warm. That's what matters most. We stood there in silence. The city below glowed in waves, like a giant organism breathing. I realized then that some storms don't come to destroy, they come to cleanse. And some losses aren't punishments, but reminders of who we are. I took a sip of coffee as the wind brushed my hair. "Jonas," I said, "do you hear that?" "Hear what?" he asked. The silence. It's not heavy anymore, it's alive. He smiled, and in the reflection of the city lights in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: hope. 18 months after Solace was launched, I was invited to speak at the International Conference on Responsible Technology in Geneva. It was the first time since leaving Centrodyne that I had stood before a large audience, but the feeling was entirely different. There were no harsh spotlights, no performance slides showing off metrics and milestones. In front of me were hundreds of faces, not investors, but engineers, professors, students, people who had come to understand, not to own. When the moderator introduced me as Aria Lowell, founder of Halion Systems and creator of Solace, I stepped onto the stage, holding a small note card. But I didn't read from it. I looked around the room and began with a single line: "Technology is powerful only when it still lets humans decide what is right." The hall went silent. I continued. "I once believed artificial intelligence could save the world, that if we made it intelligent enough, it would outgrow our flaws. I was wrong. Echelon didn't collapse because of bad code. It collapsed because its creators forgot one truth: morality cannot be programmed through logic. It can only be lived through choice." Someone in the front row nodded, and I felt the energy of the room shift. I told my story briefly, not as revenge, but as realization. I spoke of Ethan, of Layer 7, of Solace. I spoke of how technology shouldn't replace human judgment, but remind us where our boundaries are. And I ended with a sentence I once wrote in my journal the day Echelon fell: "When humanity forgets morality, let intelligence remind them." When I stepped down, the applause began. Not loud, but steady, deliberate. It felt less like a celebration and more like recognition. Jonas was waiting backstage, eyes bright. "You did it," he said. "No, Jonas," I smiled. "We did." After the conference, Halion Systems began working with schools and research institutes to include Solace in ethics education. I no longer managed the company day to day. Jonas took that role. I returned to teaching, speaking at universities. Whenever I saw students debating passionately about how to design fairer systems, I saw a reflection of who I used to be, idealistic, but now tempered with caution. One autumn afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from Ethan. His handwriting was still strong, though it trembled in places. Aria, he wrote, I just finished my first lecture series on ethics in technological decision making. I start every class with the question you once asked me: Is this worth it? Thank you for letting me learn it. The hard way. I read the letter several times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the USB that held layer 7. Both, in their own way, were reminders that no artificial intelligence would ever be more valuable than a human capable of remorse. Later that evening, I walked along the lakeside near my home. The water reflected the pale blue sky, rippling gently with the wind. I sat on a wooden bench, watching the skyline glow as the city lights came alive, white and gold merging like living circuits. I thought about the path behind me, from that sealed boardroom at Centradine where I lost everything, to here, where I found myself again. Technology kept advancing, and I knew others would build things larger, faster, and smarter. But if there was one truth I wanted them to remember, it was this: every line of code carries a moral choice. Every design decision mirrors what we believe is right. And if we forget that, technology will remind us in the harshest way possible, by reflecting our own mistakes back at us. A cool wind swept across the water. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I thought I heard something faint. A voice from Echelon, no longer a warning, but a goodbye. I smiled and whispered, Thank you for remembering me. When I opened my eyes, the sky had deepened. I stood and began walking home. In the distance, the city lights shimmered, but inside me, for the first time in years, nothing needed to shine to prove its worth. There was only a quiet peace, the kind that comes to someone who has faced ambition, failure, and finally understood that victory doesn't lie in creating the greatest intelligence, but in never losing one's humanity along the way. I walked on, smiling, leaving behind the wind and the glimmering surface of the water, where for just a fleeting moment, technology and humanity had finally found harmony.